Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Pete. I'm joined by my dear friend Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News, and we talk about church news and current events. Matthew, thank you very much for being so generous with your time once again. How are you?
Oh, privileged to be with you, as always. A blessed Lent to everyone.
Yes, blessed Lent to you and your bride and everyone at EWTN as well. And I think it's important that we begin by addressing some stories of mutual interest, chief among which is the passing of a mutual friend, Paul Thigpen. Out of left field.
It came as a real shock to me and to a lot of other people. So for those who may not be familiar with him, he was a genuinely brilliant theologian, writer. He explored the idea of extraterrestrial life, but he did so from a deeply Catholic position. He was a convert, and for so many, as you said, he was a friend. I had the immense privilege of succeeding Paul back in the day as editor of the Catholic Answer magazine. And that transition was made so smooth, and I recognized very quickly that it was very difficult to succeed somebody with the breadth of his knowledge, and also, to be honest, just his goodness and his kindness, and he was a real Southern gentleman.
You know, that has always been my impression of him as well, and everyone whom I know who knew him personally attests that for as prolific a giant as he was, he had a really tender, fatherly, prayerful heart.
Yeah, he did. And it's that word gentle. I don't think I've really encountered that many people who were engaged in media as he was, who was also such, I'll use that word again, gentleman in how he approached things and how he dealt with people. Part of it, I think, was growing up in the Savannah, Georgia. I think part of it was his family, but I think so much of it, too, was just by temperament. He was deeply kind, and it showed itself in all of his dealings and in his writings. And he was so nice that it was also easy to forget just how superbly educated he was. I mean, this is somebody who had degrees from Yale University and both a master's and a doctorate in historical theology from Emory University. So, I mean, he was beautifully trained. And then, of course, went on to become this Protestant pastor and then converting to Catholicism. But along the way, his conversion experience, and I'll leave this to others to detail more fully, but his dabbling with the occult, his time as an atheist, really, that famous phrase that he used, that he said, "I came to believe in the devil before I came to believe in God." Mm-hmm. And in that sense, he said that experience sent him, or me, he said, running back into the arms of our Lord. And it prompted him to write that remarkable book, Manual for Spiritual Warfare.
Yeah. If you don't mind us switching gears very quickly
Sure.
to another piece that we need to touch on very briefly, and that has to do with the situation in Notre Dame and Notre Dame University and the withdrawal of candidacy from an otherwise contentious subject. So, tell us about it. I'm trying to be very careful with my wording here.
Very kind, yes, exactly. We're talking about Paul Thigpen, who was deeply kind. In this case, this, I think, was really good news, that Professor Susan Osterman, who had been appointed to a very high-ranking position in a leadership in an institute for Asian Studies at it's the Liu Institute for Asian Studies at Notre Dame, has decided to decline the opportunity to become the head of this institute. She has done so in the face of what I think took a lot of people by surprise, probably at Notre Dame, just the sheer pushback, the outrage that accompanied her appointment. Because she was so ardently engaged in the support of abortion. And I think over these last weeks, you and I have talked a little bit about it. There have been protests on campus. The students themselves have been up in arms, and we have seen a wide array of bishops everyone from Archbishop Paul Coakley, who's the president of the USCCB, to now retired Denver, soon to be retired Archbishop Samuel Aquila in Denver, to Bishop Robert Barron, and also to the bishop in whose diocese Notre Dame falls, and that is the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend, and that's Bishop Kevin Rhodes. All of them have weighed in that this is simply not an appropriate appointment for a university that is supposed to be identifying with the Catholic faith. And I think this is very good news, but it's also a reminder that faithful Catholics don't have to just stand there and express outrage and do nothing else when appointments like this take place. That, in fact, if we organize, if we talk to each other, and we encourage the bishops especially to speak out, this is the sort of result that we can find.
And I'm really, truly glad for this happy news. We'll be talking more about that on this program. If you don't mind, Matthew, again, switching gears, let's talk about what we know about the Spanish bishops speaking out after their meeting with Leo XIV. The information was leaked.
Yeah, that we have very often, well, the Holy Father, let's put it this way, meets on a very regular basis with representatives of different bishops' conferences. You'll have whole bodies of bishops who will be meeting with him in things that are called the Ad Limina meetings that I expect will be resuming. And those conversations very often are not supposed to be made public. That what the Holy Father has to say to different bishops is and should be privileged between himself and them. So I think the members of the executive committee of the Spanish Bishops' Conference issued an official statement, which is unusual, regarding the leaks about the meeting it had with Pope Leo XIV. Now, the article in question was published by El País, which is the Spanish, it's pretty far left, if I recall, as a publication in Spain. So it's not a big surprise that it would glom onto, or as they like to say, pounce on a leak that purports to say that the Pope warned the bishops that his greatest concern in Spain is the far right that is trying, quote, to instrumentalize the church. Now, obviously, once that was published, you had a lot of other outlets in Spain hitting on that very idea, replicating similar headlines, and saying that, trying to confirm various things that took place. The problem is that, again, there should be this respect for these meetings. And it's one of the reasons why I think this executive committee issued a statement basically saying that the Holy Father had received them with affection. He had listened to the presentation and encouraged them in evangelizing. And obviously that, as is one of the great themes of his pontificate, he had encouraged the bishops to, as the Holy Fathers want to say, to foster communion among the members and institutions that make up the church. So the Holy Father obviously in that sort of a dialogue is going to be talking about a variety of different things. And he talked about the risks of subjecting the faith to ideologies, but they said without mentioning any specific group. And the idea of those ideologies actually ties very closely into the Lenten reflections that the members of the Curia have been hearing from Bishop Eric Barden of Norway, who was picked by Pope Leo to provide those reflections. So the idea of instrumentalizing the gospel, that's nothing new. And there's a lot of question about whether Pope Leo is actually referring to the far right or any other specific group, as the Spanish bishops have said, that he did not mention any specific group. So we have to be very careful, I think, with what we hear sometimes in the press, as you know. And I think that's one of the reasons why they issued this statement.
And I have to say, it's not only disappointing, it really is a little irresponsible, but as is typical of a lot of press outlets in terms of pouncing on news, as you rightly mentioned. I'm talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News, and we are talking about current events in light of church teaching. We just concluded talking about the Spanish bishops and the statements they made after their meeting with Pope Leo XIV was leaked. The information was leaked and published by the newspaper El País. Continuing on the other side of the break, stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President, Editorial Director of EWTN News. Matthew, I want to ask for you to comment on this new piece of news about Pope Leo responding to an atheist who loves God, let alone the fact that that concept is baffling to say the least. But Pope Leo took the time to respond to that question.
Yeah, so we've had popes in the past who have commented or fielded questions. I think very famously, Pope Francis at one point was asked by a child about his father who was an atheist and whether he would go to heaven, that sort of thing. So there's nothing particularly new here. And it's very helpful, I think, in so many ways for popes and bishops and others who are qualified. We have to stress qualified. To discuss church teachings and the reality of atheism, in part because, as we have seen for some time now, this idea of the new atheism, that atheism is chic, it's cool, that the idea of moving past religions. So any conversation, I think, that hits on answering questions that people have is a good thing. So that's sort of a little bit of backdrop to the question that he was asked, and that is there's a magazine called Piazza San Pietro, and in the February issue of the magazine, the Holy Father responded to a man from Reggio Calabria in Italy. His name was Rocco, and the question he had was, how is it possible to consider oneself an atheist and love God? I feel the need to love God, but I consider myself an atheist, or perhaps I think I am, and deep down, am I seeking God? So there's, right from the start, I'd be interested in your thoughts too on this. There is a seeking dimension to this. There is an openness in this question. And I think I appreciate what he's trying to get to. And then he added, he sent to the Pope a poem saying that I observe nature spying on every development, the sunrise or its setting on the horizon, the starry sky and the mystery of harmony. I believe that I don't believe, absolutely certain of nothingness, yet I still yearn for God. My drama is God, my restlessness is God, an atheist who loves God. Now, my blush reaction is, well, based on your poem and your question, I don't think you're an atheist.
That was my reaction too.
But let's accept it on the terms that he's asking. And so Pope Leo's response was that he thanked him for the poetry. And then, as we would expect from Pope Leo, he quotes Augustine from the Confessions. And he talks about, that late have I loved you. And then there's this line, you were within me and I was outside and there I sought you. And as Pope Leo says, it's enough to tell you that one cannot be an atheist who loves God, who seeks him with a sincere heart. And then he talks about different theologians who've reflected on what is important in life and seeking God. Yes, because as he says, the real problem of faith isn't believing or not believing, but seeking or not seeking him. And it is that quest. And I think Leo's really hitting on something very important, that so many young people today, especially, they're seeking God, but they don't necessarily have the language. They don't have the vocabulary, but it's there innately in them because it's written in us. And God is searching for us. God wants us. He loves us. And he is calling us. But so many young people, especially today, I don't think are equipped to understand enough of what it means to seek, but they're still seeking anyway. And that's, I think, very important for the Pope to be stressing.
I agree. And like you mentioned, the intellectual disconnect with this statement I found particularly jarring because, like you said, the lacking of the vocabulary is indicative of the lacking of the intellectual categories to be able to think of these questions rightly. So someone identifies as an atheist, but if they don't think it through and don't have the right categories, really what he's saying is, I would rather not choose to ascribe to a belief in God, and yet I recognize an innate need to worship God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there is, whether he consciously admits it or not, it is a tacit, very real recognition that God exists. You don't love nothing. Now, obviously there's a whole thing about the absence of of what is the absence of love and all of that, and what is evil. But at the same time, I think Pope Leo has this great phrase that God allows himself to be found by the heart that seeks him. And perhaps, as he says, the distinction, again, is not so much between believers and non-believers, but between those who seek God and those who don't. And he adds that one can believe that one believes and not seek the face of God, not love him. One can believe that one does not believe and be ardent seekers of his face, loving him as you do. He says, so Rocco, we are all longing for love. We are all seekers of God, and therein lies the dignity and beauty of our lives. And I think that one of the other points, really key final points here, Deus caritas est, God is love. And we are, as created beings, seeking love. Again, whether we know it or not, whether we can articulate it or not, whether we have the vocabulary or not, we want to be loved. And if God is love, then we are seeking him and we are longing for him. And he is there. But we live in a culture today that makes it increasingly difficult to find the language for that. And I think Leo's cutting through all of that, as one would expect with St. Augustine.
And one would expect that with St. Augustine, truly, that our hearts are restless until they rest in thee, and that you are more present to me than my innermost being. Let's talk about the African countries that Pope Leo XIV is doing an 11-day pastoral visit to.
Yeah, this is, I think, the most, he was just in Lebanon at the end of last year, so a very significant trip. This time, he is following very much in the footsteps of his predecessors. Pope Francis, I think, went to Africa 5 different times in a 12-year pontificate. And this one, though, is a major undertaking. So from April 13th to the 23rd, so we're really looking at, 11 days, basically. He's going to be visiting 4 different countries: Algeria, Cameroon, Angola, and Equatorial Guinea. The one that jumps out immediately, of course, is Algeria. Why? Because there is the direct tie in Algeria to the tradition, the legacy of St. Augustine. He grew up in what would become, many, many centuries later, Algeria. He is also very interested in the martyrs of Algeria. So that Augustine connection is there. But then as he moves elsewhere into Africa, we're seeing in a place like Angola that is on a pace to be one of the most populous countries in the whole of Africa. Mm-hmm. That's a place that matters increasingly in the reality and the future of Africa itself. And then with his visits to Cameroon, we're talking about another place where there are great pressures internationally, but then also where the church is really growing very rapidly. It's a similar reality in Equatorial Guinea. So the church is growing fastest in Africa than anywhere else on the face of the planet. And I think we're seeing Pope Leo in such an extensive trip, covering such an amount of ground, is sending that message to the African countries, to the African Catholics and the people of Africa, that they're not forgotten, that the Pope loves them. And let's also add one other really important point. More than almost any pope at the time of his election, Pope Leo has an intense amount of firsthand knowledge of Africa. Why? Because as Robert Prevost, he had visited there on a number of occasions. So he is very familiar with the reality of what is happening on the ground. He has visited East Africa at least half a dozen times as part of the Augustinians. He has a familiarity with the people there. And so that really matters, because I think as he's plotting out and what he's going to say, he's speaking from intense personal experience.
The final thing to also draw our attention to in terms of Pope Leo, it has to do with the fact that he's visiting Monaco. I've been talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of VWTN News. The time always flies when I speak with him. And we've been talking about church news and current events in light of church teaching. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.